Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a video update for this 1/6 scale Dragon Panzer II Ausf kit. Since the last video, a lot more progress has been made, specifically to the tank's upper hull and rear deck. We will be going over that in this video. For starters, the turret that you see mounted on the hull is just simply put on there just for mock-up reasons and has not been worked on yet. Work will be starting on the turret very soon, and I will be going over that in detail in another video. Now, the tank's exhaust system is actually not that bad. The kit consists of several pieces. It is a hollow plastic tube, an end cap, an exhaust stack, an armor cap, and two of these heat shield guards. These here are all made out of plastic and are on the runners with the other parts. Now, one thing to keep note is these heat shield guards need to go onto the main exhaust pipe, and they plug into this little square notch over here. Alright? But there's a problem with the DML kit, is that it is really difficult to get this into here without breaking the plastic. Now, it's okay because they do give you, they figured that you were going to break a few, so they gave you several duplicates, and they are molded into the suspension runner. However, I'm going to show you how to put it on without breaking anything, and it goes something like this. To modify the piece to make it fit better, you have to do a simple procedure. The tang itself is way too long for it to fit onto the tube without you having to stretch it and possibly breaking it. So what I did was I just pretty much cut 3/4 of it off with my clipper. Something about that should do. Now it's removed. To get an idea on how much was cut off, here goes one of the spares that's on the suspension runner, and here goes the modified version. A dab of glue goes right into this little notch here. Careful not to put too much. And now this piece simply gets inserted over the tube. The notch lines up and goes into the hole. Now, you could secure it with a clamp or so, but the glue should hold it in once it cures. And there we have it. The exhaust is now ready for the next step. After the exhaust was modified and completed, it then went into its painting and weathering phase. Here we can see the exhaust and the exhaust cover fully weathered and painted. As for the rust is the Sophisticated Finishes Rust Kit Patina. It has a very nice effect, and you can't get more realistic than that because it actually grows rust on your object. As for the grime, that was black paint that was applied via an airbrush. The two together give you a very realistic appearance. The same technique was also applied to the photo etch brass exhaust guard. It has the same weathering, but it has slightly less, as that we could still see the tank's base coat, because keep in mind this is just a shield that goes over the exhaust, so it will start to rust, however not as rapid as the actual exhaust itself. The exhaust itself is pretty much built out of the box, with the exception of the added crimp line that was added here. Like many exhausts, the exhaust would have been crimped and spot welded together, which is illustrated by this line. The line itself was a piece of plastic strip and was simply glued on. Another addition to help the look of the exhaust was in widening up the hole here on the exhaust outlet. The kit has the exhaust outlet molded pretty shallow, and the plastic is fairly thick. Now, keep in mind, on a real exhaust, these things are very thin sheet metal, and to replicate the look, the hole itself was milled and machined and then sanded down and even ground down with a Dremel to get the very razor edge appearance that we have here. By doing these two mods, gives the exhaust a very nice appearance and a very realistic look. Now that this unit is complete, it will be added to the vehicle. And here's a completed exhaust fitted to the vehicle. Has a nice realistic appearance to it, and will enhance the look of the vehicle. Another thing as of note on this 1/6 scale Panzer II is, especially on the very, very large sprues and runners, like this runner here for the upper deck and the engine deck, is that the way it mounts to the sprue is like your standard kit in that it's molded in certain break points to the sprue. Now, this sprue is a lot thicker than what most people are used to. Your average clean-cut clipper is not going to be as adequate as cutting some of the larger pieces like this one over here. On this vehicle, as another tip to cut this type of a plastic, I use the Dremel Multimax with the half-moon attachment. This half-moon attachment makes very short work of the plastic and cuts it very nice and smooth and clean. To demonstrate it, I will cut this runner clean right now using the Multimaster. And there we have it, a nice clean cut done with the Multimax. Now, even by using the Multimaster, you will still have some deburring to do. For this, I recommend just using a standard file and some sandpaper along with a hobby knife. We'll make short work of that. On these DML Panzer IIs, the upper deck is divided into two sections. You have the fighting compartment section, and you have the engine deck compartment section. The way the kit is designed is that on the fighting compartment section, you have external plates that are molded in plastic that you would snip off the runner and glue on to the sections of the upper deck here. Now, when gluing on these sections, you will encounter a small seam. However, the seams themselves are very easily deleted via using just regular spot putty and a little bit of sandpaper. The rear deck, on the other hand, requires a little bit more elbow grease. First off, starting with the bottom, we notice that I have added some bottom plate details. On the kit piece, the way it comes out of the box, this here is absent and it's just a hollow recess. Now, this isn't really noticeable on top of the model. However, if you look at it on the bottom, you will have it will be hollow, and you will not have any of the details that would actually be on the real vehicle. The way these Panzer IIs are is that on this rear plate there would be a little shelf, and on that shelf the top deck here would actually bolt to it via these 6 bolts that you see here. Now, the bolts would be on the exterior, and on the reverse they would be on the bottom, and these simulated hex nuts simulate that. As for the gap itself, that was filled in with sculptable epoxy. Once dried, I carved out the 2 sections for where it locks into the lower hull, and added the fasteners and gave everything a quick shot of the base coat. This was done because once fitted to the vehicle, as we can see here, it's going to be very difficult to get in here with an airbrush, especially with all the completed work done to the exhaust system and the rear deck. Also, another feature that was done to the upper deck, or the rear deck that is, was the addition of the tank's weld beads. The DML kit is missing these welds, as well as these welds are also going to be continued on the upper hull top and sides as well. That will be once, of course, the upper deck is complete. Just like over down here where I said I mentioned I have the simulated hex heads. The kit did have somewhat of a soft detail of that molded into the top two decks. The kit piece was a small little round nub that was molded into the casting for the deck. That nub was lacking in detail, so it was deleted. Its place was marked via a marker, and resin simulated hex heads will be added. The resin simulated hex heads give a more realistic appearance than the molded in nubs. Also, another tip when working on your model is that when you're up to this stage and you're going to mount the upper deck to the lower hull, it is good to start from the back and work your way to the front. The way the kit is developed is that the upper hull will actually lock into these two tanks here, and if you glue the front on first, it's going to be a lot more difficult squeezing in the back. So you start with the back and work your way to the front. Another thing to keep in mind is that, I'm not so sure about other people's, but mine has some fit issues with the top decks. Nothing too major, but just something to keep an eye for, because when mounting them, mount them both at the same time, in that when you're committed, you will add the glue, fit the first part on, grab the second one, and mount that one with the glue as well. You have to do this when the glue is wet, because if you glue one on at a time and it dries, you might possibly have a shift with the way the front mounts to the transmission, right along here. Now, if there's some kind of a gap like that, or even a slight gap, that's going to be a very big issue, especially once the glue dries. Because this vehicle, unlike, say, a Panzer or a Tiger 1, where if there's a slight gap, you could easily cover it over with the welds. This guy, since he's all bolted together construction on the real one, you're going to have a huge problem with that. So the best is to contend with the gap once the glues are still wet. Other than that, that's probably the most complicated and the most weird part to watch out for with these Panzer IIs. Other than that, the build seems to be going pretty smooth. Another feature that was built into the model was the modification of the tank's rear hatches here to make them fully functional. To do that, the molded-in hinges had to have been drilled out, and steel pins were placed in the plastic hinge. This was done to the two engine hatches, as well as this access hatch over here. This model does not have any interior detailing whatsoever. However, making the hatches function was a simple mod, and will help the vehicle in dioramas, especially if I have a bunch of crew figures around it. It will make for a nice scene, especially if the camera is taken at low angles. The absence of an engine interior will not be noticeable. For this engine hatch, I did not put the hinges in yet because I'm still on the fence of these small molded-in details here. I'm not sure if I will enhance or replace these details. This here is supposed to be it's actually supposed to be a cover cap for a key that would lock the hatch to the upper deck. Again, once I have some more information, I'll make up my decision, and I will either replace or add onto the parts here. More information on this is to come. As we can see, the model's molded-in nubs have been replaced, and the actual fastener detail hex bolts have been added. These greatly improve the look of the model, and were a simple modification to add. One part that the DML omitted was that this small section here, the bolts were omitted from the DML kit. However, on the real Panzer II, this top deck here has 4 hex bolts in this location here. In addition to the bolts, all of the lift hooks have been added, as well as the top deck fittings. These fittings here are all part of the kit, and were just simply mounted. The only addition that was made to them was the addition of the sculpted weld beads. Sculpted weld beads enhances the detail, as these sections are detailed and are missing from the DML kit. As of note, these 2 pieces here are the turret turner gear armored collar, and will protect the collar, or protect the turret gear from any stray bullets or shrapnel that would enter to cause damage to the turret turner. One flaw that I found when building the vehicle is that when you mount the rear deck and the upper deck to the lower hull, where the two hull pieces meet, you will have a small little recess here. If you follow the kit, this is actually going to lead to a gap. You can actually just stick the screwdriver right into the hull's interior. This is not the case on the real vehicle, and the way to fix that is when I was doing the welds with the sculptable epoxy, I took a bead of it and on the interior I compressed it in to plug up the gap. Once the epoxy was pressed in, I went in with a razor knife, like this one here, and I compressed the epoxy so that it's a nice clean surface and is flush with the upper hull. With this done, we can see that the upper hull has no gap. It's been completely eliminated, and the shift is there as it would be on the real vehicle. On the vehicle's front portion, again, the periscopes and visors have been mounted, as well as the periscope bullet deflector. Does the same purpose as this ring over here, only instead of protecting the turret turner, it protects the visor. As for the driver's visor, as per the kit, this piece here is actually functional. The way it works is they're molded in pegs that lock into the tank's kit-supplied hinges. The only mod that was made to the hinges was the addition of these small little divots on either side of the hinge. Because the hinge was designed to function and the pieces themselves are very robust, drilling them out and adding a steel pin in them was unneeded. So instead of doing that, I just added the small little divots, which give the illusion that the pin is present. Well, as of note, one thing to watch out for is that on the DML instruction sheet there is a typo, and these parts are actually mislabeled. The DML instructions has the hinges over there labeled as F16. However, on the actual runner itself, they are labeled as F14. Not a huge mix-up, but just something to watch out for when building the model. And that concludes this video update for this 1/6 scale Dragon Panzer II Ausf. Stay tuned for more updates, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more detailed components and more 1/6 scale tank builds. Thank you.